Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the bone-chilling world of a medieval peasant, trying to survive the coldest nights in a world without electric blankets or central heating. Picture this: you're trudging through a snow-dusted village, the wind slicing through your threadbare cloak like a knife through butter. The sky's a dull gray, the kind that promises more snow, and your breath puffs out in little clouds as you hurry toward your hovel. It's 1350 somewhere in England, and winter's got its claws in deep. You're not some noble with a roaring fireplace and fur-lined boots, oh no. You're a peasant, and let's be honest, you probably won't survive this without some serious grit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing outside your home, if you can call it that. It's a low, crooked structure. More a pile of sticks and mud than a proper house. The air bites at your fingertips, and you can feel the cold seeping into your bones already. Winter in the medieval countryside isn't just uncomfortable, it's a test of endurance. Historians note that winter mortality rates spiked in the 14th century, especially among peasants, with malnutrition and exposure claiming lives by the thousands. You're one of the lucky ones, still standing. But the night ahead is no joke. Your goal is simple: don't freeze to death before dawn. The ground beneath your feet is half-frozen mud, slick and treacherous. You push open the door, a creaky slab of wood that barely keeps out the wind. Inside, it's dark, the only light coming from a few embers glowing in a small hearth. The smell hits you: first damp earth, smoke, and something faintly sour, like last week's pottage left in the pot. You're not alone in this fight against the cold. Your family, maybe a spouse, a couple of kids, or even an elderly parent, huddles nearby, their breath visible in the dimness. You've got to work together to make it through, because going solo in a medieval winter is a death wish. Let's talk about that cold for a second. It's not just brr. I need a sweater cold. It's the kind that makes your teeth ache and your joints stiffen. Medieval winters were brutal, especially during the Little Ice Age, which some scholars argue was already creeping in by the 1300s. Temperatures could dip well below freezing, and without modern insulation, homes were basically wind tunnels with roofs. You're shivering already, aren't you? And here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants believed rubbing goose fat on their skin could keep the cold at bay. Spoiler alert, it didn't work, but it probably made you smell like a roast dinner gone wrong. You glance around, taking stock. Your hovel's walls are wattle and daub sticks woven together and slathered with a mix of mud, straw, and sometimes animal dung. It's not exactly cozy, but it's what you've got. The roof is thatch, which is great for keeping out rain, but terrible for holding in heat. There's a small hole in the ceiling to let smoke escape, which also lets in drafts. You're already calculating how much firewood you have left. Too little, as always. Firewood was a precious commodity, and peasants often had to beg, borrow, or steal it from local forests, risking fines from the Lord's bailiff. Speaking of lords, they're not exactly losing sleep over your comfort. The feudal system means you owe labor and crops to the manor, even in winter. If you're lucky, you've got a tiny plot of land to grow barley or rye, but right now it's buried under snow. You're not starving yet, but the pantry's looking grim. You're down to some moldy bread and a sack of turnips. Historians still argue whether peasant diets were more diverse than we think, with some claiming foraged herbs and wild game added variety, while others say it was gruel city, all day, every day. You kick at the dirt floor, trying to warm your toes. No luck. Your shoes, if you can call them that, are little more than leather scraps tied with twine. Frostbite's a real worry, and you've seen neighbors lose toes to it. You're not just fighting the cold, you're fighting despair. But there's a flicker of hope. You got a plan, keep that fire going. Pile on every scrap of clothing, and maybe, just maybe, cuddle up with the family cow later. Don't laugh, it's warmer than you think. For now, you pull your cloak tighter and head toward the hearth, ready to wrestle this night into submission. You're inside your hovel now. The door wedged shut against the howling wind, the cold still nipping at your fingers, and the dim glow from the hearth barely reaches the corners of the room. This place is no castle, it's a cramped, smoky box of wattle and daub, maybe 10 feet by 15, with a dirt floor that's half mud from yesterday's thaw. You're surrounded by the faint creaks of settling wood and the occasional drip from a leaky roof. Your family's here, huddled close, their faces flickering in the firelight. It's not cozy exactly, but it's home. And you're all in this freezing mess together. The walls are your first line of defense, and they're not great. Wattle and daub sticks woven like a basket and plastered with mud sound sturdy, but it's not. Cracks spiderweb through the daub, letting in drafts that feel like icy fingers poking your ribs. You grab a handful of straw from a pile in the corner and stuff it into the worst gaps. But it's like trying to patch a sinking ship with a napkin. Historical records from the 14th century show that peasant homes were often built in a single day, thrown up by the community in a frenzy of mutual aid. They were cheap, sure, but they were also flimsy. You're learning that the hard way tonight. The smoke's another problem. Your hearth, a shallow pit in the center of the room, spits out more smoke than heat. It curls up toward the hole in the thatch roof. But not fast enough. Your eyes sting, and you cough into your sleeve. You're used to it, though medieval peasants lived with smoky air like it was just part of the deal. You shuffle closer to the fire, careful not to trip over the wooden stool that's your only furniture. It's wobbly, like your hopes of staying warm tonight. Here's a quirky tidbit some peasants swore by hanging dried herbs, like lavender or thyme, near the hearth to purify the smoky air. Did it work? Not really, but it made the hovel smell less like a chimney and more like a weird soup. You've got a sprig of something brittle tied above the fire. Maybe it's sage. Maybe it's just weeds. You're not sure, but it's a small comfort, like believing your cow's farts are good luck. You glance at the walls again, noticing the faint scratches where you've marked the days since the last harvest. Winter's only halfway done, and already the firewood's running low. You got a small stack of logs mostly damp, because the shed's as leaky as the house. You're tempted to burn that old stool, but you'd rather not sit on the floor for the rest of the season. Historians still argue whether peasants had access to enough firewood, or if they were forced to poach from the Lord's forests, risking a whipping or worse. You're not that desperate yet, but the thoughts crossed your mind. The cold's creeping up your legs now, and you stamp your feet to keep the blood moving. Your family's quiet, too tired to talk much. Your youngest kid, maybe 6, is curled up on a straw mat, shivering under a thin blanket. You feel a pang. Parenting in the Middle Ages is no picnic. You're not just keeping yourself alive, you've got to make sure they don't freeze either. You tuck the blanket tighter around them, though it's more holes than wool. You're starting to wonder if you should all just pile into one bed tonight. Spoiler, you probably will. Speaking of beds, yours is less a mattress and more a sack of straw stuffed into a wooden frame. It's lumpy, and you're pretty sure something's nesting in it, but it's better than the floor. You're already dreading the moment you have to leave the hearth's faint warmth and crawl into that icy pile. You crack a small joke to yourself. At least the bed's not as cold as the Lord's heart. It's not funny, but it keeps you sane. You poke at the fire, trying to coax a bigger flame. The logs hiss, too green to burn well. You're no expert, but you know a dying fire when you see one. You toss on a handful of twigs and hoping for a miracle. The room's still smoky, still cold, but it's yours. You're not giving up yet. You've got a long night ahead, and every ember counts. You pull your cloak tighter, the same one you've been wearing since you stepped inside, and settle in for the fight against the frost. You're crouched by the hearth, the fire's weak glow flickering across your face. The cold still gnawing at you, but your stomach's growling louder. It's time to eat, if you can call it that. You shuffle to a corner of the hovel where a chipped clay pot sits, filled with what passes for dinner a watery gruel of barley, turnips, and some wilted greens you foraged before the snow hit. It's not exactly a feast, but in a medieval winter, you're grateful for anything that fills the belly. You ladle the grayish slop into wooden bowls, handing them to your family, who huddle closer to the fire for warmth. The smell's bland, like wet earth with a hint of regret, but you're too hungry to care. Peasant diets in the 14th century were grim, especially in winter. Historical records show that most survived on grains like barley or rye, often stretched with whatever roots or herbs were on hand. Meat, forget it unless you're counting the occasional stringy rabbit or, if you're lucky, a bit of salted pork from last autumn's slaughter. You stir the gruel, noticing a few suspicious lumps. Probably just grit from the millstone. You hope. You take a spoonful, and it's as exciting as chewing a damp sock. Still, it's fuel, and you need every bit to keep the cold at bay. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants added crushed acorns to their gruel, thinking it'd make them stronger. It didn't. But it gave the dish an extra crunch, like nature's saddest cereal. You're not that desperate yet, but you eye the forest beyond the village, wondering if you'll be out there scavenging soon. You joke to yourself, at least acorns are free. Unlike the Lord's taxes. It's a weak laugh, but it keeps the mood from sinking. You pass a bowl to your kid, who grimaces but eats. Kids in the Middle Ages didn't get to be picky. Hunger was a great motivator. You're all eating in silence. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind rattling the thatch. The gruel's barely warm by the time it hits your stomach, but it's better than nothing. You're rationing carefully. This pot's got to last a few days. Winter's long, and the harvest feels like a distant dream. You're already dreading the leaner weeks ahead, when even this sad soup might seem like a luxury. Historians still argue whether peasants could stretch their food stores through winter or if starvation was a constant threat. Some say communal sharing, like borrowing a neighbor's onions, kept villages alive, while others point to mass graves from famine years as proof of how brutal it got. You're not at starvation's door yet, but you're close enough to hear it knocking. You glance at the sack of turnips in the corner. It's half empty, and it's only January. You make a mental note to check the forest for anything edible, even if it's just bark. Don't laugh, people did that. You take another spoonful, trying to savor it. The fire's still struggling, and you're tempted to toss in a precious log, but you resist. You need to save fuel for the coldest hours, when the night feels like it's trying to swallow you whole. Your family's quiet, focused on their bowls. You notice your spouse rubbing their hands together, trying to warm them. You're all in this together, sharing the same meager meal, the same flickering hope. You crack another joke, whispering, "If this gruel's our banquet, I'd hate to see the Lord's leftovers." Nobody laughs, but you catch a faint smile from your kid. The cold's creeping back into your thoughts. You're eating to stay strong, but food alone won't keep you warm. You're already thinking about the next step, piling on every scrap of clothing you own. Your cloak's still damp from your trek through the snow, but you'll wear it anyway. You glance at the straw mat where you'll sleep later, already dreading its icy embrace. For now, you focus on the gruel, scraping the bowl clean. It's not much, but it's enough to keep you going. You set the empty bowl aside, ready to face the next challenge of this endless winter night. You're done with the gruel, scraping the last bit from the bowl, and now the cold's clawing at you again. Your hovel's smoky air stings your eyes, but you're focused on staying warm. You shuffle to a corner where your family's meager pile of clothing sits a sad stack of patched tunics, cloaks, and something that might have once been a scarf. You're about to layer up like a medieval burrito, because out here, in the dead of winter, your wardrobe is your armor? The wind's whistling through the cracks in the wattle and daub walls, and you know the night's only getting colder. Peasant clothing in the 14th century was no fashion statement. Historical records show it was mostly rough wool or linen, spun and woven by hand, often by the women in your village. You're wearing a tunic that's seen better days, threadbare at the elbows, stained with mud and who knows what else. Over that goes a cloak, heavy with dampness from your earlier trek through the snow. You wrap it around yourself anyway, pulling the hood up to trap what little heat your body's got left. Your feet are the worst off, wrapped in scraps of leather tied with twine. They're not shoes. Not really, but they're all you've got. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants stuffed their clothes with straw for extra insulation, like walking scarecrows. It itched like crazy and probably made you smell like a barn, but it was better than freezing. You're tempted to try it, but your straw pile's already earmarked for the bed and wall repairs. You joke to yourself, if I stuff my tunic, maybe I'll scare off the cold. It's a weak pun, but it keeps your spirits from icing over. You dig through the pile, finding a second tunic your spouse's, maybe, but nobody's keeping score. You pull it on, doubling up the layers. It's stiff with dirt, but it's another barrier against the chill. You've got a wool cap, too, knitted by your neighbor last spring in exchange for a basket of turnips. It's lumpy and smells faintly of sheep, but you tug it over your ears. Historians still argue whether peasants had enough wool to make proper winter gear, or if they relied on cast-offs from wealthier households. You're betting on the cast-offs because this cap's got a hole big enough to let in a breeze. Your kid's watching you, shivering in their own too thin tunic. You toss them a cloak more patches than fabric and help them wrap it tight. You're all layering up now, moving slowly in the dim light of the hearth. The fire's still sputtering, and you're hyper-aware of every creak and gust outside. You're not just dressing for warmth, you're dressing for survival. Frostbite's a real threat, and you've seen villagers lose fingers to it. You flex your hands, trying to keep the blood flowing, and notice your knuckles are already chapped raw. You glance at the pile again, hoping for a miracle. Like maybe a forgotten fur-lined glove from some fairy tale. No luck, just a scrap of linen you tie around your neck like a sad scarf. You're starting to look like a pile of laundry with leg, but you don't care. Warmth trumps dignity. You crack another joke, muttering, "If I layer anymore, I'll roll to the village instead of walk." Your kid snorts, which is as close to a laugh as you're getting tonight. The cold's still seeping through, though your layers help. But they're not enough. You're already thinking about the next step. Keeping that fire alive and maybe piling into bed with the whole family. Remember that straw mat from earlier? It's calling your name, but it's not exactly a heated blanket. You shuffle back toward the hearth, your layers rustling like dry leaves. You're warmer than you were, but the night's long, and the cold's a patient enemy. You tug your cap lower, brace yourself, and get ready to fight for every degree of warmth you can steal. You're bundled up now, a walking pile of rags, but the cold's still winning. You shuffle back to the hearth, where the fire's barely clinging to life. It's your lifeline, this pitiful cluster of embers, and you're about to become its full-time babysitter. The hovel's smoky air wraps around you, thick and choking, but you're focused on those flickering flames. Without them, you're done for medieval winters don't forgive mistakes. You kneel on the dirt floor, feeling the chill through your knees, and poke at the fire with a stick. The logs hiss, damp and stubborn, but you're not giving up. Maintaining a fire was the heart of peasant survival in the 14th century. Historical records show that a single hearth often served as heat, light, and kitchen for an entire family. You've got a small stack of logs, mostly green wood, because the dry stuff ran out weeks ago. You toss on a twig, coaxing a tiny flare of flame. It's not much, but it's enough to keep your fingers from going numb. The hearth's a simple pit in the ground, ringed with stones, and the smoke curls up toward the hole in the thatch roof. You're careful not to let the fire get too big, spark a blaze, and your whole hovel goes up in flames. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants believed throwing a handful of salt into the fire would bring good luck and keep the flames strong. You're skeptical, but you've got a pinch of salt from last month's barter. You sprinkle it in, and the fire pops with a faint green spark. Neat trick, but you're not holding your breath for a miracle. You mutter to yourself, if salt fixed fires, we'd all be toasty. It's a lame joke, but it keeps you from cursing the cold. You glance at your family, huddled nearby, your kids holding their hands close to the flames, their face smudged with soot. You're all counting on this fire, but it's a fickle ally. You've got to keep feeding it, which means braving the shed outside for more wood soon. The wind's howling louder now, sneaking through the cracks in the walls you tried to patch earlier. You're still wearing that lumpy wool cap, but it's not doing much for your ears. Historians still argue whether peasants had enough fuel to last the winter, or if they burned everything from dung to old fences just to stay alive. You're leaning toward the burn anything camp, because that stool's looking tempting again. You poke the fire again, coaxing another weak flame. The logs are stubborn, spitting more smoke than heat. You're tempted to toss in one of your precious dry twigs, but you hold back those are for the deepest part of the night, when the cold gets mean. You're already planning your strategy. Keep the fire low but steady. Maybe add a log every hour. It's a balancing act, too much fuel now. And you're screwed later. Too little. And you're shivering by midnight. Your spouse shifts closer, their cloak dragging on the dirt floor. You share a look exhausted but determined. You crack another joke, whispering, "If this fire dies, we're moving in with the cow." They roll their eyes, but it's a plan B you're half serious about. The hearth's warmth is fading fast, and you're already dreading the trip outside for more wood. You can hear the wind rattling the thatch like it's mocking your efforts. You lean closer to the fire, feeling its faint heat on your face, and focus on keeping those embers alive. Every spark is a small victory, and you're not letting this night win. You're wedged in the straw bed. Your family press close, their warmth a small shield against the cold. The hovel's dark, save for the hearth's dying glow, and the wind still rattling the thatch outside. You're trying to drift off, but something's itching, literally. The straw beneath you is alive with tiny guest fleas, lice, maybe even a bold mouse or two. You're not alone in this bed, and not just because of your family. These critters are the uninvited roommates of every medieval peasant, and tonight, they're throwing a party on your skin. You scratch your arm, cursing under your breath, and try to focus on staying warm. Pests were a fact of life in the 14th century. Historical records show that fleas and lice thrived in peasant hovels, especially in winter when everyone was packed tight. Your straw mat is basically a 5-star hotel for them, with its damp, warm crevices. You shift, feeling a sharp nip on your leg, probably a flea. The little jerk. You're tempted to leap up and shake out the blanket, but that'd mean letting the cold rush in. Instead, you grit your teeth and pull your cloak tighter, hoping to smother the itch. Your kid mumbles something in their sleep, oblivious to the tiny invaders. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants used dried tansy flowers, tucked into bedding, to repel bugs. It was about as effective as that goose fat you didn't rub on for warmth, meaning not very. You've got a sprig of something crumbly stuffed in the straw. Maybe tansy, maybe just wishful thinking. You mutter to yourself, "If fleas paid rent, I'd be a lord." It's a weak joke, but it keeps you from losing it as another itch flares on your neck. You're also battling some odd sleep remedies your neighbor swore by. She insisted a sip of ale mixed with crushed nettles would knock you out. You tried it once, and it just made you sneeze. Tonight, you're sticking to basics: stay warm, ignore the bites, and hope exhaustion does the rest. Historians still argue whether medieval sleep aids were more placebo than potion, with some claiming herbal brews helped, while others say peasants just passed out from sheer fatigue. You're betting on fatigue, because your eyelids are starting to droop despite the itching. You adjust your position, Careful not to elbow your spouse, who's snoring softly. The straw crunches under you, and you're pretty sure you just crushed a bug. Gross, but satisfying. Your wool caps slipped half off, and you tug it back, scratching your scalp for good measure. The fleas are relentless, but you're tougher. You're not some soft noble with a feather bed, you're a peasant, built for this grind. You crack another joke, whispering, if I itch anymore, I'll be my own flea circus. Your kid stirs, muttering something about bread, but doesn't wake. The cold's still there, creeping through the gaps in your layers. You can feel it on your exposed cheek, like a slap that won't quit. The hearth's embers are fading, and you're too cozy, well, cozy-ish to get up and poke it. You're counting on this huddle to keep you going. The blanket's useless against the bugs, but it's trapping some heat, and you're grateful for that. You're starting to feel the pull of sleep, but every itch yanks you back. You focus on your family's breathing, the steady rhythm cutting through the wind's howl outside. You're not sure how long you can keep this up fighting fleas, cold, and the urge to scratch yourself raw. But you're here, still breathing, still warm enough to fight another hour. The hovel's a mess, the bed's a zoo, but it's yours. You tuck your hands under your cloak, hoping to dodge the next flea ambush and settle deeper into the straw. Sleep's close now. If you can just outlast the itch, you're wedged in the straw bed, your family pressed close, their warmth a small shield against the cold. The hovel's dark, save for the hearth's dying glow, and the wind still rattling the thatch outside. You're trying to drift off, but something's itching, literally. The straw beneath you is alive with tiny guest fleas, lice, maybe even a bold mouse or two. You're not alone in this bed, and not just because of your family. These critters are the uninvited roommates of every medieval peasant. And tonight, they're throwing a party on your skin. You scratch your arm, cursing under your breath, and try to focus on staying warm. Pests were a fact of life in the 14th century. Historical records show that fleas and lice thrived in peasant hovels, especially in winter when everyone was packed tight. Your straw mat is basically a 5-star hotel for them, with its damp, warm crevices. You shift, feeling a sharp nip on your leg, probably a flea. The little jerk. You're tempted to leap up and shake out the blanket, but that'd mean letting the cold rush in. Instead, you grit your teeth and pull your cloak tighter, hoping to smother the itch. Your kid mumbles something in their sleep, oblivious to the tiny invaders. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants used dried tansy flowers, tucked into bedding, to repel bugs. It was about as effective as that goose fat you didn't rub on for warmth, meaning not very. You've got a sprig of something crumbly stuffed in the straw. Maybe tansy. Maybe just wishful thinking. You mutter to yourself, if fleas paid rent, I'd be a lord. It's a weak joke, but it keeps you from losing it as another itch flares on your neck. You're also battling some odd sleep remedies your neighbor swore by. She insisted a sip of ale mixed with crushed nettles would knock you out. You tried it once and it just made you sneeze. Tonight, you're sticking to basics: stay warm, ignore the bites, and hope exhaustion does the rest. Historians still argue whether medieval sleep aids were more placebo than potion, with some claiming herbal brews helped, while others say peasants just passed out from sheer fatigue. You're betting on fatigue, Sammy, because your eyelids are starting to droop despite the itching. You adjust your position, careful not to elbow your spouse, who's snoring softly. The straw crunches under you, and you're pretty sure you just crushed a bug. Gross but satisfying. Your wool cap's slipped half off, and you tug it back, scratching your scalp for good measure. The fleas are relentless, but you're tougher. You're not some soft noble with a feather bed, you're a peasant, built for this grind. You crack another joke, whispering, "If I itch anymore, I'll be my own flea circus." Your kid stirs, muttering something about bread, but doesn't wake. The cold's still there, creeping through the gaps in your layers. You can feel it on your exposed cheek, like a slap that won't quit. The hearth's embers are fading, and you're too cozy, well, cozy-ish to get up and poke it. You're counting on this huddle to keep you going. The blanket's useless against the bugs, but it's trapping some heat, and you're grateful for that. You're starting to feel the pull of sleep, but every itch yanks you back. You focus on your family's breathing, the steady rhythm cutting through the wind's howl outside. You're not sure how long you can keep this up fighting fleas. Cold, and the urge to scratch yourself raw. But you're here, still breathing, still warm enough to fight another hour. The hovel's a mess, the bed's a zoo, but it's yours. You tuck your hands under your cloak, hoping to dodge the next flea ambush and settle deeper into the straw. Sleep's close now. If you can just outlast the itch, you're still nestled in the straw bed. Your family's warmth a faint comfort against the relentless cold. The fleas are still nibbling, but you're too tired to care much now. The hearth's glow is almost gone. Just a few stubborn embers clinging to life. You're starting to realize sleep might not come easy tonight. So you're thinking of another way to beat the chill heading to the village's communal hearth. It's a short trek through the snow to a neighbor's hovel, where folks gather to share warmth, stories, and maybe a scrap of food. You nudge your spouse, whispering the plan, and they nod, too cold to argue. Communal gatherings were a lifeline for medieval peasants in winter. Historical records show villages often pooled resources, huddling in one home to save firewood and boost morale. You pull your cloak tighter that damp. Patchy thing you've been dragging around and help your kid wrap up. The straw mat crunches as you all climb out, and you wince as the cold hits your feet. You're headed to old Agnes's place, the biggest hovel in the village, where the fire's always stronger. You grab a stick to use as a walking staff because the path's icy and you're not in the mood to slip. Here's a quirky tidbit: some villagers believed singing lullabies by the communal fire kept wolves away. No one's seen a wolf tonight, but you're not taking chances. As you step outside, you hum a tune under your breath. Something about barley fields and summer. It's half-hearted, and you mutter, "If wolves hate my singing, they're already running." Your kid giggles, a small victory in this frozen night. The snow crunches under your makeshift shoes, and the wind slaps your face like an annoyed lord. The village is quiet, just a cluster of dark hovels under a starless sky. You spot a faint glow from Agnes's place, and your heart lifts a little. Inside, it's crowded maybe 10 people, all wrapped in cloaks, sitting on straw or leaning against the walls. The fire's bigger here, a proper blaze, and the air smells of smoke and sweat. You squeeze in, nodding to familiar faces. Agnes, grizzled and gap-toothed, waves you over, offering a spot near the hearth. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were more about survival or community spirit. Some say they were purely practical shared warmth, saved lives, while others think they built bonds that held villages together. You're just glad for the heat. You settle on the dirt floor. Your family squished beside you. Someone's passing around a loaf of stale bread, and you take a small piece, chewing slowly to make it last. It's not the gruel from earlier, but it's something. You crack another joke, whispering to your spouse, "If Agnes's fire goes out, like we're all moving to the church." They snort, and Agnes shoots you a look, but she's smiling. The stories start flowing tales of last summer's harvest, a ghost in the woods, or that time the miller got caught stealing flour. You're half listening, letting the voices wash over you like a lullaby. The fire's warmth is sinking into your bones, and for the first time tonight, you feel like you might actually make it to dawn. Your kids leaning against you, eyes drooping, and you adjust their cloak to keep them snug. The fleas are probably still tagging along, but the heat makes them less annoying. You're not talking much, just soaking in the moment. The wind's still howling outside, but in here, it's bearable. You're surrounded by people who get it, same struggles, same cold, same stubborn hope. You lean closer to the fire, feeling its glow on your face, and let the chatter carry you closer to sleep. You're still at old Agnes's hovel, the communal fire casting a warm glow over the crowded room. The chatter of your neighbors hums softly, blending with the crackle of the blaze. And you're feeling a touch less like an icicle. But sleep's still dodging you, teasing from the edges of your mind. The cold's kept you awake too long, and you're thinking about those weird medieval tricks to coax a bit of rest. Back in your own hovel, you've got no fancy featherbed, and those fleas from earlier aren't helping. Here, surrounded by the village's warmth, you're wondering if one of those odd peasant remedies might do the trick. In the 14th century, insomnia was a real issue for peasants, especially in winter when cold and hunger made rest elusive. Historical records mention a range of sleep aids, from herbal brews to chanting prayers. You're eyeing a clay jug Agnes keeps by the fire. It's got some kind of concoction she swears by. She catches your look and passes it over, muttering about warming the soul. You take a cautious sniff. It's ale, heavy with the scent of chamomile and something sharp, maybe valerian root. You sip, and it's like drinking a garden, but it's warm going down. You're not sure if it'll knock you out or just make you burp flowers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believed tying a sprig of lavender to their wrist would lure sleep by calming the spirits. You don't have lavender too fancy for your village, but Agnes hands you a dried twig. She claims it's close enough. You tuck it under your cloak, half expecting it to do nothing but make you smell like a hedge. You whisper to your kid, "If this works, I'm planting a lavender empire." They giggle, sleepy but amused, and you feel a flicker of pride for keeping their spirits up. You take another sip of the brew, wincing at the bitter aftertaste. It's no modern melatonin, but it's doing something. Your eyelids are heavier. Maybe from the warmth, maybe from the ale. Historians still argue whether these herbal remedies actually worked, or if they were just a desperate placebo for exhausted peasants. Some say valerian had mild sedative effects, while others think the real magic was believing you'd sleep. You're not picky. You'll take any help you can get tonight. Your family's still close. Your kid now dozing against your shoulder. The communal fire's holding strong, thanks to Agnes's knack for stacking logs just right. You're tempted to stay here all night, but you know you'll need to trudge back to your own hovel eventually. For now, you lean into the moment, letting the fire's heat and the low murmur of voices lull you. You crack another joke, muttering to your spouse. If this brew doesn't work, we're blaming Agnes's weeds. They huff, too tired to reply, but you catch a faint smile, the lavender twigs poking your arm now, and you're not sure if it's helping or just annoying. You shift, trying not to wake your kid, and take another sip of the brew. It's growing on you. Or maybe you're just too worn out to care. The room's a haze of smoke and warmth, and your neighbor's stories are fading into a soothing drone. You're starting to feel that pull towards sleep, like a tide tugging you under. The cold's still out there, waiting, but in here, with the fire and the brew and your family's quiet breathing, you're almost ready to let go. You tuck the blanket still more holes than wool around your kid, hoping they'll stay warm when you head back. The night's not done with you yet, but you're fighting back with every trick you've got. You lean closer to the fire, letting its glow wash over you, and wait for sleep to finally win. You're still at Agnes's, the fire's warmth seeping into your bones. But the chamomile brew hasn't quite sent you to dreamland. Your kid's dozing against you, and the lavender twig tucked in your cloak is more annoying than magical. You're thinking about your hovel, where another source of warmth awaits your animals. The idea of sleeping near your cow or goat sounds crazy, but in this frozen medieval night, it's a solid plan. You whisper to your spouse about heading back, and they nod, too tired to argue. You brace for the cold trek, knowing those furry heaters might just save you. Livestock were often kept close in medieval peasant homes, especially in winter. Historical records show that animals like cows, goats, or even chickens were sometimes housed indoors to share heat and protect them from the cold. You trudge back through the snow, your family trailing behind, the village dark except for the faint glow of Agnes's fire fading in the distance. Your hovel's door creaks as you push it open, and the familiar smell of damp straw and smoke greets you. But there's another scent, musky, warm, and alive. Your cow's in the corner, tethered to a post, chewing cud like it's unbothered by the frost. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants believed sleeping near animals could cure aches or even bad dreams. Like the cow's warmth was some kind of magical radiator. You're not sold on the dream part, but you'll take the heat. You mutter to yourself, if Bessie cures my backache, I'm calling her Dr. Cow. Your kid snickers, half asleep, and you feel a small spark of victory for keeping them entertained. You lead your family to the corner where the cow's settled, her bulk radiating a surprising amount of warmth. She's lying on a bed of straw, and you're tempted to curl up right there. You spread out a blanket, still that holy one from earlier, and make a nest next to her. Your kid hesitates, wrinkling their nose at the smell, but you nudge them closer. It's not glamorous, but it's effective. You settle in, feeling the cow's heat through the blanket, and it's like a hug from a very smelly furnace. Historians still argue whether sleeping with livestock was more about necessity or if it had cultural perks, like strengthening bonds with animals vital to survival. Some say it was purely practical heat and security, while others think peasants saw their animals as part of the family. You're not sure about family, but you're grateful for Bessie's warmth. You pat her flank, and she flicks an ear, unimpressed. Your spouse squeezes in, and you're all huddled close, the straw prickling through your layers. The fleas are probably still partying, but the cow's heat makes them less infuriating. You crack another joke, whispering, "If Bessie snores, we're charging her rent." Your spouse grumbles, but you catch a faint chuckle. The hovel's still cold. The hearth's embers barely alive, but this corner feels like a small oasis. You can hear the cow's steady breathing, a low rumble that's oddly soothing. Your kid's already drifting off, their head against your arm, and you pull the blanket tighter. The wind's still howling outside, rattling the thatch, but in this moment, you're winning against the cold. You're starting to feel sleep creeping in, the cow's warmth and your family's closeness pulling you under. The straw's lumpy, and the smell's not exactly lavender. Sorry, Agnes, but it's working. You're not thinking about the gruel or the firewood or the Lord's taxes. Just the slow rise and fall of Bessie's side, the faint heat of the dying fire, and the hope that you'll wake to a slightly less brutal dawn. You're curled up next to Bessie the cow, her warmth seeping through the blanket, a small victory against the biting cold. The hovel's dark, the hearth's embers barely a memory, and the wind still clawing at the walls. You're starting to relax, but a sharp twinge in your toes pulls you back. They're numb, maybe worse, and you're suddenly aware of the real dangers lurking in this medieval winter. Frostbite's no joke, and you've seen villagers lose toes, fingers, even noses to the cold's cruel grip. You wiggle your feet, trying to coax some feeling back, and pray you make it to morning intact. Frostbite was a serious threat in the 14th century, especially for peasants with no proper footwear or shelter. Historical records describe cases where entire limbs turned black from exposure, with no real medical fixes beyond amputation in the worst scenarios. You're rubbing your feet now, the leather scraps you call shoes doing little to help. They're damp from the snow, and you can feel the chill creeping up your legs. You pull the blanket tighter, wishing you'd stuffed it with straw like that quirky scarecrow trick you didn't try earlier. Bessie shifts, her bulk a steady heat source, and you press closer, hoping her warmth reaches your toes. Here's a quirky tidbit some peasants swore by wrapping their feet in cabbage leaves to draw out the cold. Sounds like a salad gone wrong, and you're not desperate enough to try it yet. You mutter to yourself, "If cabbage saves my toes, I'll eat my hat." Your kid, half asleep, mumbles something about turnips, and you stifle a laugh. Humor's your shield tonight, keeping the fear at bay. You're hyper-aware of your body now, checking for warning signs. Your fingers ache, but they're moving, so you're probably okay there. Your nose is cold, but not numb. Good news. You've heard stories of villagers waking up with blackened toes, unable to walk, and you're not keen on joining them. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood frostbite's causes or just chalked it up to bad luck or angry spirits. Some say they knew to keep extremities warm, while others think they stumbled through trial and error. You're betting on error, because nobody warned you about wet shoes being a frostbite invitation. You tuck your feet under the blanket, close to Bessie's warmth, and rub them gently. Your spouse stirs, their own cloak pulled tight, and you check their hands cold, but not dangerously so. Your kid's toes are curled up. Safe for now, and you adjust their blanket to cover them better. The hovel's air is icy, and every breath feels like swallowing winter itself. You're starting to wonder if you should risk a trip to the hearth to poke those embers, but the thought of leaving this warm pocket makes you shudder. You crack another joke, whispering, "If my toes freeze, I'll just borrow Bessie's hooves." Your spouse grunts. Too tired for your nonsense, but you're keeping the mood light. The cold's a predator, and you're not letting it win. You flex your fingers again, relieve they're still responsive, and focus on the cow's steady breathing. It's a rhythm you can cling to, like a lullaby in this frozen night. You're not out of danger yet, frostbite's still lurking, but you're fighting back with every ounce of warmth you can steal. The straw beneath you crunches as you shift, and you're pretty sure those fleas are still having a field day. But right now, it's the cold you're battling, not the bugs. You pull your wool cap lower, hoping it'll keep your ears from joining your toes in the danger zone. Sleep's still out of reach, but you're closer, thanks to Bessie and your stubborn will to outlast this night. You're still huddled next to Bessie, her warm bulk a lifeline as you fight off the cold's grip on your toes. The hovel's dark, the hearth's embers long gone, and the wind's relentless howl shakes the thatch above. You're trying to stay calm, but frostbite's still a worry, and you're clinging to every trick you know. Now, your mind drifts to the odd superstitions your village swears by, rituals and charms peasants used to ward off winter's wrath. You're not sure if they're nonsense, but in this freezing night, you're willing to try anything to feel a bit safer. Superstitions were a cornerstone of medieval peasant life, especially in winter when survival felt like a gamble. Historical records show folks relied on rituals to protect against cold, illness, or bad luck. You reach into your cloak, fishing out a small stone with a hole in it, a hagstone, your neighbor said, claiming it keeps evil spirits from stealing your warmth. You loop it around your wrist with a bit of twine, feeling silly but desperate. It's cold against your skin, but you're hoping it's more than just a rock. You whisper to yourself, "If this stone saves me, I'm starting a collection." Your kid, still dozing, doesn't hear your weak attempt at humor. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants hung horseshoes above their door to trap the cold outside. You don't have a horseshoe. Bessie's not that fancy, but you've got a rusty nail wedged into the doorframe, courtesy of a trade with the blacksmith. It's probably doing nothing, but it makes you feel like you're fighting back. You glance at it now, barely visible in the dark, and wonder if it's worth the barley you paid. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely psychological or if they reflected practical knowledge, like using stones to mark safe paths in snow. You're betting on the psychological boost, because that nail's not stopping the wind. You shift closer to Bessie, her steady breathing a small comfort. You're still rubbing your toes, relieved they're tingling instead of numb. Your family's quiet, their warmth mingling with the cows, and you're starting to believe you might make it through. But the superstitions keep nagging at you. Your grandmother used to swear by sprinkling ash from the hearth around the bed to bind the cold. You're skeptical, but you scoop a handful of ash from the dead fire and scatter it near the straw mat. It's messy, and you mutter, "If ash keeps me warm, I'll eat the hearth." Your spouse stirs, giving you a look that says you're losing it, but you catch a faint smirk, the hagstone's still dangling from your wrist, and you're half convinced it's just making your arm colder. But you leave it on, because why not? The night's too long for logic. You're also remembering a village tale about singing to the moon to soften winter's bite. You're not about to belt out a tune Bessie might kick you, but you hum softly. A lullaby about spring fields. It's more for you than the moon, a way to keep the despair at bay. Your kid shifts, mumbling in their sleep, and you pull the blanket tighter around them. The cold's still there, sneaking through your layers. But these rituals, silly or not, are giving you something to hold on to. You're not just surviving. You're fighting with every scrap of belief you can muster. The hovel's still a frozen box, but with Bessie's heat, your family's closeness, and that rusty nail doing whatever it's doing. You're ready to face the next hour. You're still nestled against Bessie, her warmth a steady anchor in the icy hovel, the hagstones dangling from your wrist, probably doing nothing. And the ash you sprinkled around the bed is just a gritty mess underfoot. The wind still battering the thatch. But you're thinking beyond survival now. Your mind's drifting to the village church, a place where peasants often sought refuge from winter's bite. It's not just about warmth. It's about hope. Maybe even a touch of divine protection. You're tempted to make the trek. Bundle up your family and huddle in the stone-walled sanctuary for a few hours of relief. Churches were central to medieval village life, often doubling as communal shelters in harsh winters. Historical records show peasants flock to them, not just for prayer, but for their thick stone walls that block the wind better than any hovel. You nudge your spouse, whispering about heading to the church. They grunt, half asleep, but nod. You wrap your kid in the holy blanket, still warm from Bessie's heat, and pull your cloak tighter. That damp patch thing you've been dragging around since night fell. The village church is a short walk, but in this snow, it feels like a pilgrimage. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants believed sleeping near the church altar could cure ailments or bring good dreams, like the saints themselves were tucking you in. You're not banking on miracles, but a stone floor sounds better than fleas and frostbite. You mutter to yourself, if St. Peter warms my toes, I'll light a candle. Your kid, groggy but awake, giggles softly and you feel a spark of pride for keeping their spirits up. You step outside, the cold hitting like a slap. The snow's piled up, crunching under your makeshift shoes, and the church's silhouette looms ahead, its steeple barely visible in the dark. Inside, it's not exactly cozy. Stone walls don't radiate heat, but it's less drafty than your hovel. A few villagers are already here, sprawled on straw mats or leaning against pews, their breath visible in the candlelight. The air smells of wax and damp wool, and a lone candle flickers by the altar, casting long shadows. You find a spot near a wall, settling your family on a thin layer of straw you brought along. Historians still argue whether churches were true havens or just cold comfort for desperate peasants. Some say they offered real shelter, while others think the spiritual boost was the real draw, giving hope to those facing winter's wrath. You're just glad to be out of the wind. You pull your wool cap lower, still itching from those fleas, and tuck the blanket around your kid. The stone's hard beneath you, but it's dry, and that's a win. You crack another joke, whispering, if the saints don't warm us, at least we're holy Your spouse huffs, too tired to laugh. But you catch a faint smile. The church is quiet, save for the soft murmurs of other villagers and the occasional creak of wood. You're starting to feel the weight of the night, your body aching for rest. The candle's glow is soothing, and you let it pull you closer to sleep. You're still cold, still worried about frostbite, but the church feels like a small fortress against the winter. You lean against the wall, your family close, and focus on the flickering light, hoping it carries you through the darkest hours. You're settled in the church now. The stone wall at your back, a cold but steady comfort. The candlelight flickers, casting soft shadows across the huddled villagers, and your family's nestled close, their breath slow and even. The wind's howl is muffled here, but the chill still seeps through your layers. That patched cloak and lumpy wool cap haven't given up on you yet. You're exhausted, your toes still tingling from the frostbite scare, but your mind's drifting to something warmer, the promise of spring. It's months away, but imagining green fields and soft breezes is what keeps you going through this brutal night. Spring was a lifeline in the medieval peasant's mind, a beacon of hope during winter's darkest days. Historical records show that peasants clung to seasonal cycles, planning their survival around the thaw that brought planting and plenty. You close your eyes, picturing your tiny plot of land, now buried under snow, sprouting barley and peas under a kinder sun. You can almost smell the damp earth, feel the warmth of a day without this bone-deep cold. It's a fantasy, but it's fuel something to hold on to as you huddle on this stone floor. Far from Bessie's warmth and your hovel's smoky hearth, here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants mark the days to spring by carving notches into a stick, like a countdown to salvation. You don't have a stick, but you've been mentally tallying the weeks since the solstice, whispering to yourself, just a few more moons. You mutter a joke. If spring forgets us, I'm writing it a stern letter. Your kid, half dozing, lets out a sleepy chuckle, and you feel a flicker of triumph for keeping them grounded. You shift on the straw mat, trying to ease the ache in your back. The church is quiet, save for the soft snores of a neighbor and the faint crackle of the altar candle. You're clinging to that spring vision fields alive with green, the village bustling with planting songs. It's not just about warmth, it's about food too. Remember that sad gruel from earlier spring means fresh greens. Maybe even a bit of cheese if the goats come through. You're already dreaming of a proper meal, not just turnips and grit. Historians still argue whether this obsession with spring was purely practical or if it carried a spiritual weight, with peasants seeing the thaw as a divine reward for enduring winter. You're not sure where you stand, but the thought of April's sun feels like a prayer answered. You pull the blanket still more holes than wool tighter around your family, making sure your kids' feet are tucked in. The cold still here, pressing against your skin, but the church's walls and the hope of spring are keeping it at bay. Just barely. You crack another joke, whispering to your spouse, "If spring's late, we're moving to Egypt." They grunt, too tired for your nonsense, but you catch a faint twitch of their lips. The candle's glow is fading now, and you're starting to feel the pull of sleep, stronger than before. You're not thinking about fleas or frostbite or that rusty nail in your doorframe. Just spring, its warmth, its promise, It's quiet assurance that you'll see another dawn. You lean into the wall, your family's warmth mingling with yours, and let that vision carry you closer to rest. You're still in the church. The stone wall cool against your back. The candles glow, now a faint ember in the dimness. Your family's pressed close, their slow breaths mingling with the soft snores of other villagers. The cold lingers, seeping through your patched cloak and that itchy wool cap. But the dream of spring, those green fields and warm breezes, has settled in your mind. A quiet anchor. You're exhausted, your body heavy from the long night of fighting frost, fleas, and fear. Sleep's finally creeping in, its gentle pull stronger than the wind outside. You're ready to let go, to drift off in this chilly sanctuary, surrounded by the faint hope of dawn. Sleep was a precious escape for medieval peasants, a brief reprieve from winter's relentless grind. Historical records suggest that rest was often fitful, interrupted by cold and hunger, but cherished when it came. You adjust your position on the straw mat, careful not to wake your kid, who's curled against you, their face peaceful despite the chill. The blanket still more holes than wool drapes over you both, and you feel your spouse's warmth beside you. The church's stone floor is unforgiving, but the shared heat of your family and the villagers around you creates a fragile cocoon, enough to coax your eyelids lower. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants believed dreaming of bread meant good fortune, a sign of plenty to come. You're hoping for that dream tonight. Maybe a loaf fresh from the oven, not the moldy scraps you've been gnawing. You whisper to yourself, "If I dream of bread, I'm baking a castle." It's a soft joke, barely audible, but it feels like a final stand against the night's weight. Your kid shifts, mumbling something about spring, and you smile, tucking the blanket closer. Historians still argue whether sleep in medieval times was a single stretch or broken into first and second sleeps, with a wakeful hour in between. You're too tired to care about the debate, you just want one good stretch of rest. The church is quiet now, the candle nearly out, and the wind's howl seems softer, like it's tiring too. You focus on your family's breathing, slow and steady, and let it guide you toward sleep. The cold's still there, but it's losing its edge, softened by the warmth you've scavenged from each other, and the hope of spring's distant promise. You crack one last joke, a faint murmur. "If I snore, blame the saints." Your spouse doesn't stir, but you imagine their eye roll, and it's enough. You're sinking now. The church's shadows blurring, the stone's chill fading. Your thoughts drift to gentler things, fields of barley swaying under a warm sun, the smell of fresh earth, the hum of a village alive again. The night's not over, but you've fought it to a draw. You let your eyes close, the hagstone still dangling from your wrist, and surrender to the pull of sleep. The world softens now, the edges of the church fading into a gentle haze. You're no longer counting the hours, no longer tallying the turnips or worrying about frostbitten toes. The straw beneath you feels less prickly, the cold less sharp. Your family's warmth wraps around you, a quiet reminder that you've made it this far. The wind's still out there, whispering through the village, but it's distant, like a story you've already heard. You picture spring again, soft grass, a clear sky, the promise of a new day. Your breath's slow, matching the rhythm of those around you, and the night begins to dissolve. Let the cold wait. You're drifting now, carried by the hope of warmth. the comfort of shared survival. Sleep comes like a friend, gentle and sure, pulling you under with a whisper of peace.